Hi guys, today I'm very happy to host Kirill with us. And a very short intro before we start. Kirill is a cloud native expert, seasoned CTO, and the founder of one of the, in my opinion, the best and the most versatile DevOps agency, mkdev. And to start with, Kirill, very welcome on board, and I would love to just, how would you introduce yourself?
Hi, Sergey. Thanks for having me on the show. I've been thinking because for me, it's my whole career is a bit hard to properly introduce what I'm doing because I'm used to basically coming up with titles that are beneficial for the work. But the way I describe myself is cloud native and DevOps consultant. I focus a lot on the cloud and help companies to work in this space. And I'm also co-founder of DevOps and Cloud Native Consultancy that does the same as I do individually, but at a larger scale with the team, basically.
Kirill, I'm curious because when we met a couple of years ago back in Berlin, you were really devoted to drive educational project. Well, I wouldn't call it educational, but you were doing at the beginning. mkdev was a company who was specialized to train younger engineers to become a better version of themselves. And if I look back, you're probably mentioning somewhere on one of the links that you've professionally coached and made a better version of engineering themselves about 80 developers. But then it's transitioned to different style of the business. Could you describe how did this all began and what was the best learning about early stage of mkdev?
So, yeah, mkdev originally, and I think it basically goes hand in hand with my personal professional development. Just to give background, I started many years ago, like 13 years ago, as a front-end developer, and I moved basically in the opposite direction. So I moved from front-end to back-end, and then to the infrastructure work. And back when I used to be a backend developer, focusing on Ruby on Rails, I also had an interest in learning a bit more about entrepreneurship, about building the audience, about starting some small business. And the obvious first thing was to try become an expert and teach people programming. Which then grew to become mkdev, and then Leo, my co-founder, joined the project, and we started doing it at a bigger scale and offering a mentorship platform, so that people could hire a mentor to learn various programming languages and technologies. And I still believe a lot in mentorship. I think it's a great model to learn. That's also how I learned many things, and I had great mentors at the start. Which is like the model itself is very different from online courses. And for sure, it's also more expensive. So we try to kind of do this B2C mentorship format for like a couple of years. Actually, mkdev turns 10 years this year in September. And then maybe for the first 5 to 6 years, it was this B2C mentorship service that in the end did not work out that well. One reason was that it was focused on CIS market. And then there are many things like war was probably the final end of it, that we just decided to completely kill it. But there were also many funny things that when Russian government tried to block Telegrams, they also blocked our business. So many things like this made it really hard to keep going in this direction. But at the same time, I transitioned 8 years ago to be in the infrastructure field. So I found myself working more and more with the cloud, with the DevOps. I switched to become a contractor instead of having a permanent job. And I saw over time that, actually it's pretty hard to really move the needle in the bigger companies being individual contractor. And it's probably better to have a team which can achieve even more and especially help bigger companies to change. And that's also when Pablo, the third co-founder of mkdev, joined the company. And when it transformed to the existing form of B2B DevOps and Cloud Native Agency.
Kirill, when I look at your track record, you represent a truly success steps for every engineer out there. You've started with something simple. You were working on the front end. So if we scale it down, that your impact was in one-to-one relation. So what your changes, the user will see and fail. And then when you move, to backend engineering, you could impact many users because basically backend serves front ends and different end. And then the next step would be to scale this up even further to go in infrastructure. And if I look at just for the audience, you've done remarkable steps. It was like BCG, Deutsche Bank, Alliance Group, Payback Group, Kaya Health. Like those names are really like a big milestones and on the market. And I would love to learn, how much did it change if you work on a smaller scale startup where you're moving the needle, but you actually see the needle, it's right there. Like this is what I described the front end, versus where you are in these giants like Alliance Group or Deutsche Bank, where your impact might be having like a massive effect on whatever happens, but you don't see that in the overall infrastructure.
It's hard in a certain way that, yes, with the infrastructure work, you rarely see the result like being reflected in the product, except that when you, of course, like improve performance, for example, then the services load faster or the infrastructure costs less, and then the stakeholders are happy because the expenses are lower. But the main result that I see as a DevOps engineer or a DevOps consultant is more internally, and the result of my work is from other engineers inside the company or from some metrics that are not visible to the outside users. And so that's especially hard in the big enterprise, because in the startup, it's usually not so many people involved. Like I would consider a startup probably something like under 200 people, and then maybe 50 to 70 people in engineering, and then on infrastructure it's just up to 5 people sometimes. So then the impact of your work is clearly visible because what you do is impacting all of engineering in the company. And versus something like bigger companies like banks and insurance companies, you rarely see this kind of impact, except your immediate group that you work with. But for me, it was never an issue in terms of that I don't see changes in frontend, for example, because indeed it's also similar with the backend work, because lots of backend work is not visible to the end users, right? Like you might be working on some service to process analytical events, and then it's also something that users never see.
I'm also, as you describe these steps, I'm thinking back in the days when you were, when you could still call yourself a backend Ruby engineer, we were still hosting our services on, like in Germany, on Hetzner. So like basically on a bare metal. So you would have like a dedicated server somewhere in the cloud, which we call it right now cloud. But you would still have tight relation to these servers. And right now, even at the beginning, you introducing yourself, I'm a cloud native. And cloud nativeness is a very interesting term for many people. Like, what does it really mean? Do you actually still see the bare metal servers? Have you seen them in the rack somewhere, or it's all virtual for you now?
For me personally, it was almost always virtual, even when I was working on the companies that have their own data center. In the end, at this scale, when you have your own data center, you have a separate team responsible for hardware, and you still work with virtual machines. Maybe it's an OpenStack or KVM, but it's servers. What cloud native means is hard to describe because for me it's one of these terms that is good to use in marketing or describing what you do. But when you dig deeper into what it actually means, it's kind of tough, because for many people, cloud native means Kubernetes. So if company is using Kubernetes and containers, that's cloud native. I sometimes argue that, look, probably the original cloud, or like the big cloud, is AWS. And then if you're running workloads on AWS, then the cloud native way to run things is to use something like AWS Lambda and ECS and not to use Kubernetes. So what's cloud native in this case? And also, is cloud native what the open source community defined, or what's the cloud providers defined. But usually when we talk about cloud native, it does not mean cloud-specific services. It means this open ecosystem and some principles like using containers, configuring like the 12-factor approach, configuring with env variables, and all the ecosystem also around Kubernetes and containers. That's what understood by cloud.
But do you believe that's the ultimate end, or we will still have some evolution? I just want to like play a bit of a devil's advocate and mention David Heinemeier Hanson. So probably you know him as the founder of Rails, and he is always bullish and criticizes cloud culture. And he says, "Okay, guys, moving back to bare metal would save you tons of money compared to AWS costs, etc." Of course, then he assumes that the knowledge is there to manage that, and you have time and resources to manage that. But otherwise, just out of curiosity, what are the big trends in terms of like, cloud nativeness / I don't know, return to the bare metal? Because you always have this, ups and downs. How do you see this?
There is I would not say, I don't see actually a trend of moving back to on-premise, despite the ways that DHH and the 37 signals created. I highly admire everything they do, and I think for their case, it made total sense to move to on-prem. And for many companies, it doesn't make sense to just start moving everything to the cloud if they already have an established data center practice. But as you said, there are many things that DHH is not talking about. For example, they released a tool called Camel, which makes it really easy to run containers on any server. Might be on-premise, might be VPS. But when you look at it, knowing what it takes to run the infrastructure, you see that Camel basically SSH into a server and pulls container and starts it and restarts. So it's pretty bare bones. But who manages what's on the server? Like who configures the server, who makes sure it's secure, who like the tutorial says like, oh, you just go to Hesner and then you create a VPS instance, and then you create a load balancer. Okay, so now we're using the managed load balancer. So that's already kind of one of the things that cloud gives you. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a healthy discussion. There are many benefits in using on-premise, especially now with the AI. They're like probably cheaper to just run on bare metal than to pay crazy fees for running GPUs in the cloud. There are many performance gains to get from the on-premise. I was just reading an article this morning of someone comparing that performance of modern SSD disks is something like 16 gigabit per second, and the maximum you get from EC2 on AWS is 2 gigabit per second. So the hardware for the disks improved so much in last years, and it became so much cheaper. But in the cloud, you don't get this performance gains. So then if you actually have a use case or if you will benefit from faster disks, it's better to use on-premise or use something like Hetzner. Mm-hmm. But the trend I see from cloud providers, first of all, that still more and more companies move to the cloud, plus most small companies will be better off starting in the cloud. That's also what 37 signals are telling. If you just start a new application, start a like small virtual machine or just use something like AWS or Heroku or Vercel. Then trend from AWS side in particular, and in the end it's like the biggest and most important cloud still, is they're trying to make using their cloud easier, because I think 2 years ago they realized, okay, we have maybe like 700 plus different services and different ways to use the services together. It's time to actually slow down a bit and offer some proper abstractions on top. So they started offering simple services, and they started offering some open source tools that basically duct tape all of the existing services together. And my favorite example that I often talk about is AWS Copilot, which has nothing to do with the GitHub Copilot, which is an open source CLI tool where Amazon guys, they came up with all the right minimal abstractions to deploy applications, which is basically, if I'm not wrong, there is an environment and there is an application. The application consists of services, and then you have a tiny YAML manifest to deploy this. And then underneath this tool, Copilot, it configures for you properly all the multi-account environment. It configures for you ECS or AppRunner, connects the queues, databases all together. But basically, as a developer, you can just use Copilot to get your application running on top of a really relatively well set up complex cloud infrastructure without knowing much about how this infrastructure works.
So do I get this right? I haven't used AWS Copilot, and do you describe a world where you create an abstraction on layer of abstraction? So it's basically cloud inside a cloud, where the smaller cloud is basically customized for certain need of a small, medium-sized company without the heavy load of everything else that AWS is offering.
More or less. Okay, in case of AWS, it's always a bit awkward because they also have AWS Lightsail, which started as a Dropbox competitor from AWS, and now they added like another 10 services to Lightsail, so it's now mini AWS. But yeah, I think in general the evolution of infrastructure moves direction of building better abstractions, and that's the main appeal of Kubernetes for me, is that that's this machine for us to build new infrastructure abstractions, because the actual resource management part of Kubernetes does not make that much sense to me in the cloud. I think in most cases makes no sense to use Kubernetes if you're running in AWS. For me, the core value of something like Kubernetes is that we finally have a standard how to define our applications without thinking about servers. So because Kubernetes gave us like the deployment, service, pod, all of these entities, and it gave us the way to create custom resource definitions, so you can create even more powerful abstractions. Like you can have a manifest to create a database, or you can have manifest to create some very organization-specific service wrapping. And cloud providers also try to do this and offer the abstractions. They go a bit different ways. Like I think Google Cloud and Azure, they are more into building on top of Kubernetes. So if you look at Azure Container Apps or the Google Cloud Run, it's basically Knative, which is in Kubernetes. And Amazon goes their own way. They just offer you ECS and Lambda, which are then also abstractions in the end on top of virtual machines.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, like to observe this cloud war, so to say. When we say the world war, it's fight for the customer, fight for the enterprise, fight for the end user. But eventually, everyone started with slightly a different approach. And I just remember early days, and when not even early, like 10 years ago, when we were talking about AWS, there was mainly EC2 and S3. This is what we needed to basically start off. And right now, if I log into my account, there are hundreds of services that I can't even spell, not even knowing what they're doing. Like, you diving in the rabbit hole, and then you just realize, do I even need that? I don't know. There are so many comparing this and that, versus like earlier, it was a lot more simpler. But what you're saying, and that this is a question. So pretty much the fight for the customer now happens on the front end of the abstraction. So you're offering a customer exactly what he wants. He doesn't need to understand the whole complexity of a cloud, but only you solve exactly what the problem is. So for some people, it's this stack. For the other one is that stack. And as you described, there is behind the need just YAML file that pulls up only services that needed for specific customer case.
It's really one of the battles that AWS in particular fights for. And I'm talking a lot about AWS because that's kind of my focus area. I'm not so heavy into GCP and Azure. But in case of AWS, yes, they're trying to simplify all the time. They're trying to simplify with starting like light sales. They're trying to simplify by building these open source tools. But in the end, those solutions, they target a particular type of customers that also attract that services like Fly.io and Vercel try to attract. So it's kind of platform as a service. And I think those are great for startups. Again, if you just want to start quickly, you don't have dedicated infrastructure engineers, you just want to start pushing the releases as fast as possible without thinking too much about configuring your network, then that's kind of the service that you should use, this kind of platform as a service. I think still for many companies, you should just use Heroku or Fly.io. You don't need to go to the cloud to get started and like validate your ideas and get first customers. But then there are also lots of customers that have completely different needs, and those customers are much more important for big cloud providers. And I'm talking about, let's say, a big bank or a company which has, let's say, 50,000 people, their own data center, and they're looking into moving to the cloud. For these kind of companies, they don't need a nice abstraction on top of the infrastructure. They have a much more complicated environment and needs in terms of how to move to the cloud. For example, networking, that's what AWS understands really well. They have all the right services to make cloud migrations easier, and they understand that if there is some 70 years old insurance company from Germany that wants to move to the cloud, and they're used to using something like NFS, like a network file storage, when they move to the cloud, they will probably expect some kind of network file storage offering. So then AWS offers them elastic file service solution. And then Google and Azure need to do the same, right? They need to attract startups, they need to attract smaller companies, but they also need to move all the big whales to the cloud, because that's where the biggest money are.
Kirill, you've named like key players. You've named GCP, so it's a Google cloud platform. You've named Azure, so this is the cloud platform from Microsoft. Obviously, AWS, Amazon. You've named Heroku. I think Heroku is a company belong to Salesforce.
Yeah.
Well, in Germany, what do we have? We have also SAP. I don't know if they also have like a cloud. Probably they also have a proprietary business that they run. There is also, what else is there? Oracle. Is Oracle still playing in the game?
Oracle there is Oracle Cloud, which I never used. No, I'm lying. Actually, I did use Oracle Cloud because they have probably one of the most generous free tiers out there. So they give you a couple of virtual machines forever for free. So if you, as a private person, want to run a VPN, Oracle Cloud is fantastic because you get this virtual machine forever. And then I don't know which other use cases they have. It's probably very good to run Oracle databases, but as I said, I have zero experience over there. There is an IBM cloud with Red Hat, which again, I don't have much experience with. I worked a lot with OpenShift, so platform as a service, and like another layer on top of Kubernetes to make it even more friendly for developers. But I lost track of what's happening there, because I think like now Red Hat is inside IBM. IBM has its own cloud, but then there are also partnerships between Red Hat and AWS, so you can run OpenShift on Amazon or OpenShift on Google Cloud.
What about Meta? Does Meta and the whole Facebook universum have their own cloud, or they also use some of the resources from what we've mentioned?
I think Meta, they just have their own data centers. So it is in a way cloud, because I'm pretty sure at their scale they have many data centers and very like comprehensive internal tooling to deploy and run stuff. And they plan to own something like 10% of all GPUs in the world, if I understood correctly their announcements. But they don't expose this cloud, as far as I know. So there is no way to use it.
Because it does seem like a natural evolvement of the process. Once you have enough resources, you realize that you could start making money with that. And I think the originally Amazon, they didn't have a plan to run a cloud infrastructure and rent to other businesses. It's been only used as a proprietary technology to make sure that Amazon shop, and so books are sold on time and everybody were getting this, what they were paying for. And then it evolved later on, and now it is probably one of the most lucrative branch of Amazon businesses. So if you just, out of curiosity, look in the future, let's look 5-10 years in a time, do you think it's going to be like just a few providers that will own and split the market, and the rest is going to be just falling behind? Or how does the cloud look in the future?
I would expect consolidation among the three major cloud providers to continue, because in the end, even the smaller ones, like I think Fly.io is just running on top of AWS, and I think Heroku historically just was also running on top of AWS. So even if you're not using Amazon or Google, maybe your platform runs on top of Amazon or Google, unless you use something like Cloudflare, which was doing lots of very interesting things in the last years. But consolidation will probably continue. There are still most of the workloads are on premise, and most of the companies are trying to move to the cloud. So we'll just see more things on AWS and Azure and Google Cloud over time.
I would love to explore this naive question of mine. Like I'm working now with many hospitals in Germany. So health tech business is stuck in the 80s or 70s. And most of the time they don't even know what kind of cloud they use, and what most of the time they don't know, and they don't have expertise. They know it's been managed by some other company, but I'm sure they already own some kind of cloud. They don't they just don't know in which. And if you start, if you come and say, okay, let's work together, let's, I don't know, consolidate data. How can I get access to your data, especially patient data? They say, yeah, go ahead, talk to our providers. And then there is some layers down, you identify someone, and then they already, hosting this somewhere, either in AWS or on Azure, etc. But my question is, do you believe that at some point, when these big cloud providers will consolidate and share and split the market among them, there is going to be the data is going to be basically in one infrastructure, one pool. So the getting data is going to be just identifying where it is, and then I don't know, it's going to be we wouldn't even need API keys anymore, because it's going to be a call to specific I don't know, data sets or data lake, because data is already there, in fact. Or how do you see this future of data migration, data exchange, data management?
I would hope, or just kind of, I like to think that cloud providers don't have that kind of direct access to the data. Okay, in the end they have, but we are in agreement that they don't go and look at the customer data. And probably that's especially important for financial services, for the health companies, is that the data is kind of located in the right place, in the right country, and that no one except the company, or like health company or financial company, can access it. There are some curious, because one of the new services AWS announced is called AWS Clean Rooms, and I was having a hard time to understand what it does till recently. But basically, it's a service for if there are two companies that have some data in the cloud, and one of the examples was actually medical data. If there are like two, let's say, two hospitals that are independent from each other, like two private hospitals, and they store patient data, and they both store data in AWS, this new service allows them to identify common data, to find that there is the same patient in the both hospitals without exposing the rest of the data to each other. So seems like I would think some time ago that it's a very niche use case, but if AWS already built something like this, then probably it becomes more and more relevant for this within the same cloud sharing of data.
I would love to see this future already. I mean, just imagine how many possibilities we would have by being able to analyze or share personal, some of your data without ability to expose personal edge of this data, but the data that would allow you to drive intelligence on, I don't know, disease, or let's say fraud prevention in the finance world, where you have like this ability to cross-reference so much, assuming it is stored in one cloud provider. So probably clean room is a very good idea, if managed properly. If there is no like basically some bad actors that would decide to do something totally different about it.
I mean, ideally also cross-cloud provider, right? I would probably not be so happy if everything in the end becomes just AWS. So I'm glad that there are also other cloud providers, and there's also discussions about having an on-premise data center, because I think it's more important to have like open standards and system, like a way for systems to communicate with each other than to just centralize everything in one cloud and be there. Because in the end, like AWS, it's Amazon, it's US company. So then, for example, for Germany, it's probably not so beneficial to trust everything for an American company in this case.
There was a funny, interesting post yesterday in LinkedIn that Bill Gates sits on top of a tree, and behind him, basically, a stack of papers, kind of like stick on one to the other, and he holds CD in his hand. And there was back in the days commercial telling, how effective the modern drives are. Like CD-ROM could replace, I don't know, 20, 100,000 of piece of papers. And I made a comment that no matter how much Bill tries, the German bureaucrats are not convinced. They're still using paper. so when we are talking about like basically cloud technology, generally in my practice, I constantly have to battle through unnecessary fear of, is that an American company, but the data needs to be stored on prams in Germany and stuff like that. When I look at the companies you worked, like huge companies, how do they manage that? Like, or there is also like a compliance fears and compliance risk that everyone needs to muscle through, explain, and basically make sure that kill that fear.
Besides fear, there is a regulation, right? For example, till recently, Germany just would not allow you to use like a US cloud provider for certain type of medical applications. For instance, they would just say no. And there would be like a list of allowed suppliers or allowed cloud providers, which in case of Germany, miraculously happens to be a telecom cloud, which is an approved supplier.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of course, because it's ridiculous or for there are other reasons, they dropped it, and now you can just use any cloud provider as long as you're compliant with regulations. And there is a lot of fear. There's lots of convincing for moving to the cloud. I see from the customers I worked with that most companies understand that they need to use something more modern, even if it's not about moving to the cloud, but to kind of handle the data center differently and have some kind of private cloud instead of like 60 days process to deploy stuff.
Was there any like a situation on your day-to-day work that you like anecdotal situation that in the middle of the project somebody walks in and says, "Okay, Kirill, there is a compliance request, I don't know, to redeploy container on telecom cloud." You were like, "What?"
I had situations where it's basically about like uncertainty if it's allowed to use something or not, and then just in case something like telecom cloud is being used or some other like local cloud provider or some data center. And in the end, I think it's the problem here is not the compliance or regulations. The problem is that if there would be a German AWS, then there would be no such issue, right? People would be just like, okay, I can choose AWS, but here is the German cloud providers I'm happy to use because they have all the features and reliability and technology. The thing is that in many cases, there is simply no good alternative to AWS. I would be happy to use for some projects to something regional, but it's just opting out for like using a bicycle and refusing to use a Porsche, more or less, in many cases.
Interesting.
There are good German data center providers. Cloud providers, there are okay ones, like Hessner does lots of things. There is the, what was the other one, like Ionos, but there is nothing on the level of the US companies and the US cloud providers.
And how, what does it make, or what does it take to build a decent cloud service? Like, why Hetzner, or is Hetzner still has a chance to become like this German answer to AWS?
I don't know, like, it's hard for me to say because First of all, because I work a lot with AWS, like you should not trust me because I will tell you how great AWS is, right? But from what I see, when people talk about Hetzner today, they talk about, oh, you can just get a really good, powerful bare metal machine for $25 per month. I rarely hear about that. Well, there is this serverless offering from Hetzner that you should use. And I would expect that because I read a lot of news and everything that I would see something like this, but I rarely see. I see all about the big three or big four cloud providers. If there is a chance for someone to build something like this in Germany, I think technology-wise and people-wise, there is nothing stopping. Except that it's hard to find people, and then it's a really long project, and the company would be playing a catch-up game. What we see right now is that even AWS themselves, they cannot catch up with the AI space lately, which is pretty amazing because imagine all the resources and everything they have, and they are just option number 4 in the list of AI services. They're just kind of losing this battle rapidly. So I cannot imagine how hard it would be for like a regional company, doesn't matter if it's like France or Spain or Germany, to start today a new cloud provider and be a serious competitor to AWS. Especially given the regulation changes that I mentioned before, because let's say 5 years ago or 8 years ago, you could basically argue that, okay, German law requires us to use something German. Today, there are less cases like this. So it's in almost in every situation, you can just use AWS like Frankfurt region and that's it, or even any European region.
Kirill, I have like a very interesting question that probably everybody would love to kind of model. So imagine you and me, we would love to build a great cloud infrastructure and become a competitor to AWS. So we have unlimited amount of money to spend. And we already have, for example, I don't know, let's say in Frankfurt, somebody gives us the resources, any kind of bare metal. We could install racks with, liquid azote that cooling it down. So in terms of hardware, it's all there. So this is, I'm just representing the world of Hetzner. So theoretically, we could get this credit and get it not for $25, but for free. So we have unfair competitive advantage by offering this. But I think the key in understanding what cloud is actually this software layer that actually allows what is happening. So could you walk us through or basically explain the basics even of why there is this software needed and what is it doing to make cloud a cloud?
A tough question, right? I would probably be a very rich person by now if I would know how to build a cloud provider from scratch. But there are many smaller cloud providers, like the telecom cloud that I mentioned before, which follow a very similar model, like, and in many countries you can see it, is that they have lots of hardware or bare metal, and they have people who know how to manage the hardware data center. And the next step they usually do is they take something like OpenStack to do this tenant isolation so that you can basically give different customers different virtual environments. And then on top of OpenStack, they would quite often build some nice or not nice, like a mediocre interface. And that's it. So then basically, because you're using OpenStack has lots of software as a service things, like they have the database as a service, they have queue as a service. And that's probably the fastest way to build the cloud, right? You just take OpenStack and people experience with it, and then you can cover most needs because you'll be able to offer managed Kubernetes. And then managed Kubernetes is something that most companies are happy with. You have some databases, and you just need to make sure that your team is able to maintain all of this without building custom software. But as you're telling, the key things that AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure offer is their own software, because they're not just repackaging OpenStack for you. And the software, it's decades of building this software, right, and making it incredibly powerful. Like, again, sorry, like I focus a lot on AWS, but that's what I know. they have a system. At some point, they realize that on every machine, they waste something like 5 to 10% to like manage this tenant isolation, networking, etc. inside the server. And they came up with a physical device, like a purpose-built hardware that they plug between, or like roughly speaking, between. I don't know how exactly it looks, but this device is connecting tissue between all the bare metal servers, and they offload all of this 10% of like networking and many other things to this device. I think it's called Nitro, if I'm not mistaken. And then they upgraded all data centers to use this custom device. So it's hardware and software, which then allowed them first to save millions, if not billions by now, because they can squeeze more out of the actual servers. Plus, it allows them to build much more interesting software solutions, because now they have this little piece that is kind of core part of all infrastructure that they can do anything with. So software is for sure the most interesting part there, but I don't want to also undermine the complexity of managing the like the physical part of AWS or any cloud provider's data center. It's also tough and hard. Like, remember a couple of years ago, one of the largest data center providers that is located in France, they had like a fire, and then it was something like a quarter of capacity lost. So hardware is also tough to manage.
But do I get you right that 99% of value of cloud infrastructure is not actually the bare metal? It's basically the layers of different software that do incredible things that allow customers to be on cloud. So like multi-tenancy, or basically it's just like one little part, but access, security, like all of the stuff that we're doing and we take it as a granted, is managed by software that's proprietary, was developed by cloud providers. And for any new player, it will take years, and I don't know, years to build in order to be competitively there, to have any kind of competitive advantage.
I think historically, yes, that's what made like 10 years, no, more than 10 years ago, when you look at what it takes to run something on your own server and what it takes to run something on EC2 instance. EC2 instance was way easier, and there was no fancy hardware on AWS side. It was the same hardware plus their software, so then it's just really easy to start servers. But if you talk about today, I think it changes a bit. So it's not only software, because now, for example, everyone needs GPUs. So then Meta buys like all of these GPUs possible. AWS announces big collaborations with the NVIDIA to also build these enormous GPU clusters. And without these GPUs, they cannot even offer software to offer the AI stuff that everyone like wants to use these days. Another example is that every cloud provider, and AWS again were the first ones in this, they build their own hardware. So AWS, they have Graviton, so they design their own chips. And now when you run workloads, you can choose, instead of Intel, to use this ARM-based Graviton processors, which are cheaper and more energy efficient. For some workloads, they're just faster. And
This is incredible.
And they design their own network cards. Since a while, they also partner with the hardware manufacturers to basically come up with some better hardware versions that are tailored to the cloud. So it's a lot. For sure, you can buy like the generic, the Intel-based servers and run there. And as a company which is not selling the cloud, it's totally fine. Like, again, come back to DHH, they bought like state-of-the-art bare metal machines, and they run Basecamp and other services there. Perfectly fine, cheap and faster. But if you are aiming to compete with the big cloud providers, you need to remember that besides these decades of experience building software on top of infrastructure, they by now have more than a decade of experience building purpose-built hardware, which is, it's a bit a different game when you design and produce your own chips, and when you just repackage OpenStack.
Well, this is, we know from Apple. Apple was, Apple is famous for combining
Right.
and making like a perfect marriage with hardware and software. But now that you mentioned DHH again, I think you're also reading his blog a lot. Um, I think he posted several days that the release of Devin. So for those of you who don't know, that Devin is a LLM model that is specifically designed to be your better version of Copilot, or basically Copilot slash ChatGPT. So it's basically the AI that does programming pretty well, at least a lot better than anyone else, and everyone believes it will get only better. And just picking information out of what you just mentioned, do you believe that AI is going to be able to outperform us in terms of designing chips? Like NVIDIA, by the way, they don't have their own factories. So NVIDIA is the company, the factorless chip provider. So they design chip. So they use human engineering to design perfect chips and then outsource it for factories to produce them. So I just imagine that like there's going to be dev in whatever version, or like something in the future that will be really good in designing this kind of hardware, and then on top of that provide like a software layer that automatically they could create like this, so to say, the blueprint for a perfect competitor to any cloud provider out there. How far are we from that future?
I would just add, not only NVIDIA is factories, it's more or less 90% of all the advanced chips are produced by one company these days. So Apple, they don't have a factory for chips, they have TSMC. Same where NVIDIA chips and everything. The Amazon chips I mentioned, they're also from TSMC.
Are you talking about the Taiwan factory and the?
Yeah.
So
More or
would you?
less everything. So every company that does advanced chips, and I'm talking about the chips that are in your smartphone, there's Graviton chips. Basically, currently in the world, there is TSMC that like they produce most of the chips. Then there is a Samsung that they have their own fabs, like factories to produce chips. But for sure, like for example, Apple would not trust Samsung to build chips for them. And that's more or less it. And Intel, of course. And Intel now enters the same field of producing chips for someone else, because historically they were just like designing and producing their own chips. But this model does not really work that well anymore, because when they look at TSMC, there's like more money into just repurposing your factories to produce chips for anyone who designs the chips. So most companies in the last years, they design chips with software, like in Silicon Valley, for example, like Apple. I think in Munich they also design some chips here in Apple. But the production, they hand over the software or design to Taiwan, and then Taiwan produces all the chips.
I knew that they're making a lot of chips, but I was still thinking that it's basically, I don't know, maybe for 50% of capacity, the other 50 is done somewhere else. But if this is like a vast majority, I don't know. Like I would really start shitting my pants if there is going to be any geopolitical conflict in this, war or whatever between Taiwan and China.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason for this conflict that might be upcoming, is because there is this movie, the new Dune Part 2, which is all about the spice, that everyone wants the access to Arrakis. I read one time a great article about that Taiwan is the new Arrakis because everyone needs chips now, and the last 30-40 years of R&D are concentrated there, and you cannot simply replicate it. It's all like a single point of failure for the chip industry, which is at the industry of everything these days.
It's super interesting analogy, because the spice allows you to navigate seamlessly between different stars, and with the era of AI, without chips you cannot run AI. So basically, if we think this way, that okay, we would love this intelligence to help us to take decisions, you need chips. Without chips, there's going to be no AI. So it's a great analogy for spice.
I would, if I may, I would recommend a book for the listeners called Chip War. I forgot the author. I think the last name is Miller, but the book is called Chip War, which is a history of all the semiconductor industry starting from the 50s till today, and it's amazing. Like, it's so well written that you can read it like in one day. And it describes as a journey how we went from many companies producing chips to the situation of today where 90% of advanced chips are designed or produced in Taiwan, and why the company is actually genius, because they thought about, we will not design our own chips, we will make software that anyone can design chips and we will produce them. Just fascinating.
Interesting. Like I would love to ask you a question about that. Like I was recently recording a podcast about evolution of databases, and it started with evolution in space when the first like satellites were sent, and they needed to have like resilient databases. These Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, they're still operational, and the software still runs, the database is still there. And looking at that time, I was thinking, fuck, these guys were brilliant. The engineers were so brilliant. Like, why can I build I want to have a culture that my team does the same thing with the same kind of aspiration. And then we started to look at the map, the hubs for great technology. And so US, or let's say West Coast of US, Silicon Valley, became a hub for the best software engineering out there. For some reason, this is basically, it concentrated this right in that's very small spot. Then Taiwan created like a hub for the chips, basically, like for this great engineering. And I would love to like challenge you with the question: do you believe it down to some individual that create a foundation for the root of technology in specific spot, or is it political will? Like, why do we, for example, don't have in Germany or like similar situation for, well, Germany was also considered to be like a homeland for great cars, right? Like, I don't know what predefines this geographical places.
A question. I mean, in terms of Taiwan, for example, I think it's just so happened that it was cheaper to produce many chips in Asia, and then the Taiwan government was ready to give lots of money to start the chip industry. And then there was this guy, again, I forgot his name because I forget names, from Intel, who was like the one of the top executives from Intel, who moved there, and with the Taiwanese government started this. So lots of money, and then cheap workforce and other conditions in the same place.
But there is always like one guy, right? Like there's one guy who was working in Intel, and he comes with this idea, oh, look, they have this place, they have this governmental framework. Why not to start it here, right? It's always down to individuals.
In some way, probably. But then there were also 3 other guys, or I think 4 other guys, who started Intel at some point. And before Intel, there was this Fairwind semiconductors that was started by another guys. And thanks to these Fairwind conductors, there was Intel. And thanks to Intel, there was this guy who started TSMC with Taiwanese government and investors.
Do you believe?
No. So then you can trace it back to some people, but then these people also work with some other people, so they also have a history.
Do you believe that ideas they don't die, they stick, and they become kind of like this virtual layer, and we carry ideas from one generation to the other? Because sometimes I'm thinking about something really innovative, and then I read a post that there is a startup just started with this idea. I'm like, fuck, it can't be possible that somebody had the same idea, but it's probably ideas, they kind of belong to the historical layer, and many, when the technology is right and the conditions are right, many people simultaneously started to think about that, how to solve that, and then those who are first, they they get the balls to become entrepreneurs.
Yeah, there seems to be the pattern that some inventions just pop up simultaneously at random parts. And then sometimes it's just some countries or systems created better conditions for ideas to pop up and develop. Like I'm a big fan of David Deutsch. He's like one of the pioneers of quantum computation, and he has a couple of books. One of them called Beginning of Infinity, where he describes what's important to move the progress in general, how it's driven by explanations, and how basically better and better explanations move us forward, and how it's hard to argue with good explanations. And about how different systems, like he compares, for example, and such, like we'll go into politics now, but he compares the democracy setup in UK and in Germany. And he says that basically in Germany, everything is focused on finding a compromise. So, there is no majority winning. It's like there are 5 parties at the same time ruling the country. And then you need everyone to agree to accept some new law, which is a good system to kind of keep things stable and slowly improving, but it's not the best system to quickly iterate over ideas. And then he described that in UK, is basically it's either one or another wins and has like 4 years or whatever to try all the new ideas. And then if in 4 years it's not working, they re-vote and choose another one, which then this kind of system leads to more failures probably and more instability. Like you see now UK entered recession a couple of weeks ago, but maybe long term it's a better one because you progress faster instead of always searching for compromise.
This is brilliant. By the way, I would ask you then to share your books and recommendation later on in the description. But what you mentioned describes 2 systems. One is basically more risk averse. The other one is less risk averse. Where in one system the decision are tied to individuals. The other one needs more consensus. And it's funny, I had my one-on-one with my boss, by the way. Hello to Uli. Uli is my boss. And she says, Sergey, if you want to move the needle in any German company, you need to build alliances. You need to build consensus. Even if you're right, nobody's going to listen to you until you're going to convince everyone else that there is, that they also right. They should be right with you. So this is why maybe German economy is always going to be doomed to lose to other modern economies with the model of higher, risk taking by individuals. Like your English example is perfect because Anglo-Saxony gave the birth to American system, Australian system, like many other systems that actually came out of this political branch or whatever I call it. Yeah, super interesting. How do you feel in Germany?
I'm this, I don't know, I feel like a rare example of a immigrant who is pretty happy here because I see at least in some groups of immigrants, they're always upset with Germany. I think maybe it's because I moved my more than 12 years here. So I think there are like different, when you move to Germany in 2020, you'll have a completely different experience than when you move to Germany in 2012, like me. But there are many things to improve, but overall, I think it's great. If you look at the numbers, it's also great in terms of the number of jobs, about the size of economy, number of companies. The automotive is still pretty strong. And I think the German cars are still great, even though it's kind of a bit shaky. And yeah, hard to say. And I noticed that sometimes, at least on Twitter, when you say good things about Germany, people get upset. Which is like, how dare you?
No, I think there needs to be a lot more people with appreciation to the system we work and live and able to contribute and able to actually change that system or influence system critically, because only by not settling in and constantly trying to change, you bring some innovation. You moved to Munich the most conservative city in Germany. Because like you always have these migrants, they say like, look, if I'm going to be living in Germany, it's either Berlin or no land at all. And you prove to be, different in a way. So how does it feel in München compared to Berlin? Because you've been living in two cities. What are cons and pros? And would you recommend somebody to give it a try and also move to München?
I have a counter question because when you say Munich is conservative, what do you mean?
It's a concept that media created about the city, that if Berlin is all about poor and sexy, city of artists, city of startups, city of venture capital, München represents stability, safety, resilience, like this consistency of family businesses. This is why also Bayern or Bavaria have the highest concentration of capital per capita. And when I'm saying capital per capita, it's not about like money people have in their pocket, but amount of businesses passed from generation to generation. So this environment creates different culture. That's why every time you compare like image of people living in München versus people living in Berlin and München, you imagine people wearing suit, professional, well-spoken, educated. Berlin is more of a hippie style kind of, so that's again, this is my reflection on the media image we see.
No, it's fair. I think for me important is how international city is, and I was afraid that Munich will be like 100% German. Not because I don't like Germans, but because like I appreciate international community. By numbers, if I'm not mistaken, Munich percentage-wise is more international than Berlin. It has like 25% of people here are international. And I need to distinguish between Munich and Bavaria. If you go to a small Bavarian town or a village, it will be very different from Munich, and that's where the conservatism starts, let's say. For me, it's still amazing when I cycle and I pass by some smaller villages, is that people actually like the traditional Bavarian clothes, like the Trachten it's called. It's not something like a gimmick for Oktoberfest. They actually use it daily. And there is also a separate line of professional clothes that is styled in Bavarian, like this traditional Bavarian that people go to offices with. But I think the main difference is that it's a big versus small city, because Berlin is like 4 million people or 3.5, and Munich is, well, depends how you count. You can count up to 1.2 million if you include all the surroundings. Mm-hmm. But then it's a very traditional styled city with a very concrete city center with lots of like residential areas around, and that's it. And it's impossible to compare it with Berlin, which has like 10 city centers and completely different areas. Munich is the same everywhere. For me, the attraction of Munich, one of the biggest ones, is the nature, actually, which has nothing to do with Munich. Like Munich did not create Alps. It just so happens that they're here, and it's impossible to beat this for me personally. Not only comparison to Berlin, but with any place in Germany, at least for sure, because you have this incredible nature. So if you're into cycling, hiking, and all these things, Munich is one of the best places in Europe to live in. In terms of startups, I see a big difference. There is at the east train station of Munich, there is a place that they built like an area for startups, like this new fancy kind of business center where startups are supposed to be. And there are startups like Lufthansa sitting there, and Allianz.
Yeah.
So it's completely different vibe compared to Berlin, where you go when a startup is something like this office, and maybe startup is like 15 people, and they have an investment of 50,000 euro, and Lufthansa. So there are some great startups in Munich as well, like the Freeletics, Personio, I think Trade Republic is also here, but it's different kind of startups.
Yeah, my favorite by far my favorite business experience was working at Freeletics. also thanks to this culture that on a weekend you could just jump on a train to Garmisch and then go for a hike to whatever, take the nearest one. It's called Vank or any other mountain, and you think, oh, this is special. And you talk to locals and they do it every weekend. Literally every weekend, people spend a lot more time outdoor. And in Berlin, this is what we're missing, because like out of Berlin, you don't have much unless like, you have to drive several hours. That's definitely an advantage.
If the train goes here, right? That's the problem also in Munich.
Oh yeah. Please. Don't let us not even start about like, these trains.
But this is the thing in Munich. I noticed, like, it took me some time to realize it, is that Munich is way more car-heavy place, even though the public transport inside the city is amazing. But the S-Bahns, this, how do you call them in English, like the short distance trains, they go every 20 minutes. And after 9 p.m., they stop going. So you cannot go from a smaller city next to Munich back to the Munich city center, which I think would be pretty unusual for Berlin, because you have something like every 3-5 minutes you have a train.
Yeah.
The whole day, 24/7. And that's why I think there is a bigger car culture here. So more cars in general. People go to these lakes also by cars. So you have lots of traffic jams on the weekends with people going to the lake and going back from the lake. Like a mandatory 10-15 kilometers traffic jam on the good day.
Did you get yourself a car in München?
No. And I want to say, like, we talked about before about appreciating Germany or place where you live in. And something that I think is not talked a lot about is how incredible Germany is with the car sharing. Because if you compare with France or Sweden, like any country in EU, I never saw a better car sharing ecosystem than in Germany. At any given moment, I leave my house, there are maybe up to 30 car sharing cars from by now maybe 15 different providers. I can just take the car and drive somewhere. And the registration, the services takes minutes. You could just like scan your driving license. I tried to use car sharing in Stockholm 2 years ago. They just asked me for some local Sweden-specific bank ID, and that was like one of 2 car sharing providers. And here is like, if you take miles, the sixth share and all the others, it's just incredible. And I don't see why people don't talk enough about it, how amazing car sharing in Germany is. So that's why I don't have a car. I just go out and there is a car for me waiting for me there, and it's insanely cheap basically to go to the lake, for example, or to go to like shop for furniture.
Well, I could mention many other things that I see being a father, like raising kids, and like ability of organize like this secondary school or education like cycle, or like I really love education here, but it's not, it doesn't relate to everyone. And I'm really curious also to see, Kirill, like, where do you see us with the whole AI? I mean, this is like the most common topic I always ask during this podcast. Where are you standing with AI? Like, how often do you play with some new tools, explore this behind the engine, playing with their APIs, etc. Like, how do you see this becoming a norm for us?
For me personally, it already became the norm. I like to compare the AI or Gen AI, the hype wave or the hype train, to crypto stuff, because when there was like the same things around the cryptocurrencies, I personally could not find use cases for this. There was like, it was all over the news, and then okay, but how do I use it? With AI, it's completely different, because ChatGPT appeared, and then another 2 billion services around it appeared, and instantly I started using it more or less every day. mkdev, everyone in the team is using it every day. So it's crazy how within 1 year, the completely new set of workflows appeared around just working. So, and I think it continues in this way. One of the recent things that we did for with AI, and I wrote an article about this, there is something like alt text image. There's an image description for the website that is used by the browsers and by the search engines. And basically, we figure out that on mkdev.me website, we have like 1,000+ images without this text. So what we did is just 15 lines of Ruby code talking to OpenAI, just to ask, hey, look at this image, give me a description, and then save it to the database. I cannot imagine something like this 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I would have to tell to the team, now spend like 5 weeks going image by image and describing it. And now it's just affordable and fast. With coding as well, with the GitHub Copilot. And now there is new one, this Claude 3 from Anthropic, which is even better at coding. The risk I see, and not myself, I saw it like on Twitter, some guy said like, his prediction is that this year AI or Gen AI with LLMs will stuck because we will not get GPT-5, we will not get the AGI, we'll just be stuck with this kind of very powerful but still hallucinating LLMs, and lots of startups will die, and it will be basically this kind of how do you call it in this Gartner thing, like throw of disillusionment, or these things that it will kind of slow down a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But release of things that like Dev in this AI coding agent, I think it's amazing. I understand why lots of people are scared, but in the end you cannot stop the progress.
I believe we should embrace every change. We should basically, because we have an unfair competitive advantage to understand, what is it doing, how is it doing, how does it deploy things, how does it, like, I don't know, navigate through a checklist, and why does it do this in a certain way. And I'm asking this question because I hear it every day from my daughter. My older daughter is in gymnasium, so she's 15 years old, so coming to the age where she's curious. She's like, what am I supposed to be doing in the future? What am I going to be learning? Dad, is it like math or physics? And I'm like, the foundation is everywhere, but it's very hard for me to advise. I think we had this conversation 3 years ago before ChatGPT, and she was in computer gaming and stuff. And I say, what about, building yourself as a game designer? So that the tutorials are there, like it's you could, start using some engine and then create a game yourself. But I see that it might be like a dead end. So like, I'm curious to see, what would you advise my daughter?
I don't think it's gonna be a dead end, because right now with these LLMs, everyone got a personal tutor, which I think is amazing. Like if you want to learn programming, I would not be afraid of something like Devin replacing you. I would be happy that now, because before, if you want to learn programming, you need someone ideally to help you out and like tutor you and mentor you. And then if you're unlucky to find a mentor, well, that's it. What do you do? Like you just spend 5 more years to learn, or you just search for another profession today. You just go to ChatGPT or you use Devin, and then it helps you to learn. Sometimes it tells like complete garbage to you, same as humans, right? But I don't know how it will impact education, for example, in general, because seeing that now people write their like a PhD or the masters with the ChatGPT, or passing the tests with the LLMs, it's hard to understand where it's going.
You know what I've noticed in my kids and the generation of my kids. By the way, it's universal, because my daughter does this school exchange, and tomorrow I have a girl from Barcelona coming and living in our place, and I see how much time they spend and what they do online, basically, but just by absorbing and I see that although everything is there, they kind of lost motivation. Like, it's like, it's very hard for them to identify like area they want to evolve and go from 0 to 1 and like finish the course, or I don't know. It's always like, I love this German word, it's called Überflächig. So basically just touching the top, but not they. It's hard for them to kind of deep dive and then to understand what's beneath. So, and when I look at you, Kirill, I would love to ask, who was your mentor? Like, how did you manage to actually make that leap from being young engineer towards what you are right now?
I had many. The probably the most impactful one was the Dmitry Vasilets. I'm sure like he will not listen to the podcast, knowing him.
We will take him in a podcast, so he will listen.
Let's see. But yeah, I would say like I was really lucky with mentors in general, and also with the. So my father basically pointed me to web development career at some point by just telling, "Why don't you just try to make a website?" So instead of like not learning how to make websites, but just to try to do it, and that kind of triggered slowly learning more and more in this area and trying to build things. And in terms of the Dmitry, for example, I was just a junior developer and I didn't have much experience in Ruby on Rails. And so I was working for a very tiny amount of money, but in exchange for access to all of his knowledge and advices how to proceed. Plus, advices like to move to Germany, for example, also came from him at some point. I'm sure that, I tried to build a place to find a mentor at some point, but commercially it's really tricky. So I don't have really good advice how to find mentor today, except that among people you know, or just asking online, like on Reddit or applying for the free internships. We had lots of people on mkdev. We had for a long time a free internship program, which basically means that if you just started with learning programming with Ruby and Rails, you just contact us and you become our kind of a junior developer. We pay you nothing, but you get to work on a real project and we answer all the questions, the code reviews, etc. And probably lots of companies, or maybe not, some companies do it as well. I like in Germany, I think it's called, there is some systems that has similar experience when people students work inside companies.
Ausbildung or like is it?
Ausbildung, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Are you still doing this? Do you still work with some junior developers that exchange knowledge for sweat?
Recently, a couple of years ago, we just settled with one developer who contacted us like this, and now he's basically on a salary and just develops always for us. The problem with these interns is, and I think that's in general a good advice for people who try something hard, is not to stop after 2 months, because the format of mentorship does not include that someone will explain everything to you. It's more about go learn this and then you go and learn on your own, and that lots of people basically say now I will go and find some online course. That's why also we stopped doing this, because the retention of people were 2 to 3 months, and they would not be able to be self-sufficient in learning, which is fine because everyone learns in a different way. Someone just needs a direction and then can Google stuff. Some others need a boot camp or an online course.
Well, Kirill, I think you mentioned your father, and I think your father could be truly proud of you, what you've done, what you've achieved, and on all the steps of your career. And where, to finish this off and to better link with the audience, what is going to be the future for mkdev? Where are you going? How can people leverage your knowledge, where to interact with you, how to contact you, anything that you could share as the next step for mkdev and yourself?
I want mkdev to keep growing and to become really a huge consultancy, and also to launch some products, but first grow as a consultancy. Our motto is basically services for businesses and knowledge for the people. So we share as much as possible with the outside world in the videos. So you can basically go to mkdev.me and you will find the links to our YouTube channel, to our podcast, to the articles, to the newsletter, etc., etc. And that's also the best place to follow what I'm working on publishing, besides Twitter and LinkedIn, probably.
Great. And guys, like we're going to place all this link in the description if you would like to work with Kirill directly, or service his company or some of his engineers, and get his knowledge and leverage his experience on the board, and make your company land more softly in the cloud. Then the links you will find in the description. And I much enjoy talking to you. We probably will follow up more. I would love to learn more of your ideas about science fiction and the visions we have today. We didn't have much time for that, but it was a great pleasure hosting you, and looking forward to link again.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.